So 9-year-old James Fortin was in the crowd on July 8, 1776, in front of the Pennsylvania State House when the Declaration of Independence was read for the very first time in public. He was born a free black, and he never imagined that the words in the Declaration did not apply to him. When he was 14, the earliest age at which he could, with his mother's permission, he went and he signed on to be a privateer on a ship to fight for the Continental Army. The second voyage, they were captured by the British. The British captain had a boy, his own son, who was about James' age, about 14, and he told James, "You can be free, you can go to England if you'll just accompany my son there." And James said, "I'm fighting for my country. I can't turn my back on this." And so he went down into the notorious ship, the Jersey, where he was held for 7 months. He had another opportunity to escape when a trunk was offloaded, but instead he allowed another sick young soldier to take his place. But he was freed 7 months later in a prisoner exchange with the agreement that he would no longer fight. So he walked home from New York to Philadelphia, some 100 miles, and when he got there, he assumed the role of his father. His father had died, and so he joined his father in the trade. What his father's trade had been as a sailmaker. Robert Bridges owned the company. He was a white man who employed black and white sailors, sailmakers. And when he died, when he was nearing the end of his life, he passed his business on to James Fortin. He wanted his own sons to be physicians and attorneys. So James, who had a very inventive mind, kind of developed a special way of rigging ships, and he rose to become the wealthiest black man in all of Philadelphia, one of the wealthiest African Americans in this country. And he went on to use his considerable wealth to fund the abolition movement with William Lloyd Garrison, who was, big abolitionist. He funded the newspaper, The Liberator, and did so much to try to take his own freedom and to spread it out. And not just his own life, his children. You will be a blessing, and your descendants and all those. He and his wife, Charlotte, had 9 children, and his sons became leading abolitionists. His 3 daughters formed the Female Anti-Slavery Society, and one of his granddaughters, Charlotte Grimke, you may remember that name, a poet, an educator. So his whole family kind of joined in this really amazing work of blessing the country with freedom. He's the embodiment, right, of what it means to be a great American, like not just living for your own self, but living for those beyond you. I confess I didn't know anything about James Fortin, or if I did, I'd forgotten, until we watched the Ken Burns 12-hour series this winter, kind of between the lull of the sports, saw the American Revolution. And while I still could not pass a test on it, I did come away with, a bigger grasp, kind of an overview of it, an understanding that things that I hadn't really thought of, like how long the war lasted, 8 years, right? And the suffering and that people endured, the soldiers, fighting so much of it in New England or New York or in Canada during the bitter winter, people literally freezing to death, no shelter, no shoes at times, no pay, and the leaders not safely ensconced far away, but up on a horse leading the charge, taking a cannonball through the neck. The suffering and the misery, was not to take lightly. And then, of course, the role that other people played, like the French. I guess I hadn't remembered how decisive the French were in securing a victory for the colonists. And, of course, the role that black Americans played, not just James Fortin, but the other 5,000 black soldiers. And, of course, women who didn't just sew flags, but were involved in all kinds of ways. But what really I took away from it was the pronounced role of Native Americans. I hadn't really understood or remembered just how central all the tribes were and how they fought on both sides, depending on who they thought would be probably more likely to, respect their land and their way of life, which means they were normally fighting for the British. And I hadn't remembered or hadn't learned about the racial slur in the Declaration of Independence about Native people. Didn't remember that in 1863 the British had really angered the colonists by passing this act where the colonists could not move across the Appalachian Mountains, could not move further into Native American territory, and had just really held that line, and how angry, and how now scholars, again, thank you, Ken Burns, really highlight the role of this as one of the precipitating factors of the Revolutionary War. And so there it is, the 27th grievance against the king, kind of maybe the last, and now scholars think one of the most significant, speaking about Britain's support of the merciless Indian savages. The merciless Indian savages, right there in the Declaration of Independence, excoriating them for the wicked, terrible ways that they fight. I mean, all of us know that when it says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they didn't mean black Americans. They didn't mean women. You know, they meant white men or white men, you know, who could own property. And so that's sort of the world in which we live in, right? And in some ways, it's a world of both incredible blessing. I think all of us can, I think all the time, what percentage of women on this planet have ever lived the life I've had the freedom, right? So this incredible sense of blessing. And I think that's why people come to a place like Peace Church. We're not here because, there's a dogma or doctrine we believe in and we write our name on. We're not here because we think there's some heaven and hell and some reward and punishment. I think people come in here because at our core, the only way we can make sense of this life is it's been a gift, right? I mean, you can't, this is more than I could have created. The sound of the birds when I run in the morning, the beauty of the sunset, the touch of a lover, a newborn at the breast. The gift of a friend. Life is a gift. It's a blessing. It's something we receive. And that's just the core of our tradition. God comes and God blesses. That's kind of the foundational part of the first 11 chapters of Genesis when it's this kind of prehistory. There are 5 blessings. God blesses the sea and sky creatures, and God blesses the humans, and God blesses the Sabbath, and God blesses Noah, then Noah blesses God right back. So it's this understanding of blessing that somehow, whether you want to say some deity has blessed us, that's how we live in this world. And there's also the curse. There are 4 curses, 5 blessings, 4 curses. And the curses come in the book of Genesis whenever humans have disrupted the story. The story, these colorful stories in the first 11 chapters are really our native tribal wisdom. There's enough, believe it, there's abundance, but the young couple become afraid and they hoard and they clutch and they grab the fruit. And so the curse, right? The curse of the serpent, the curse of the soil. And then the story of Cain and Abel, these two who can't get along, right? Who, again, the jealousy, the enmity, and so the curse there. And then, of course, the story of Noah, which is really in many ways a story about Noah caring for his own, putting them on the ark, but as the rabbis criticized, not thinking about the others who would be left behind. And so another curse. And I appreciate so much what Ellen Davis, who teaches at Duke, says about this. 5 blessings, 4 curses, only slightly encouraging, but enough to keep the story moving forward. And you think about our own country, right? Maybe 5 to 4. And that idea of almost this cursedness. God curses in the scripture the land and the soil and the serpent. And I think about, the things that we struggle together as a country. Just the idea of the land, the very land being cursed. You think about the places where Native people were held on reservation and how, 100 and something years later, those reservations became the relocation camps, the detention centers where Japanese Americans were held after Pearl Harbor. Same places right now, right, where ICE is putting their detention centers. It's almost like there's this cursedness of the land that we just can't move beyond. And yet, 5 to 4, right? Enough to keep moving forward. And so the story moves forward. And the story moves forward in this way in which Abraham's people spread out, Abraham and Sarah's, they become a blessing. And it's not just this idea of God blessing, it's this idea of covenant. Like, we've all we've got, people. we're together. We're this God. At the start, God is like, be my people and I'll be your God. Follow me and I'll be. And then finally, God's just like, hey, I'm just going to be your God, right? Because I can't count on you. So it's this understanding of covenant that somehow we are bound to one another, right? Like it or not, we are bound to the SOBs destroying this country, right? We are bound to one another. We are going to make it or we are not, right? Which makes me think again about young James Fortin standing there, 1776, July 8th, listening to that Declaration of Independence. Some years later, 1817, he was a 50-year-old. It's 41 years later. He had fought for the Revolution. He'd become the successful sailmaker. He had spent his life working for the abolition of slavery. And he gathered there with other abolitionists at Mother Bethel Church, which is one of the oldest black churches in this country, part of the AME Zion. And it was at this meeting that they were discussing the colonization movement, which was really pretty big at that time. Remember this idea that we would, have these colonies in Sierra Leone and Liberia and places where black Americans could go back. And on some level, the earliest abolitionists, there was a lot of support for that, including James Fortin and others. There was also racism in there, right? Which is like, okay, well, we're just going to move you people along. And so they had a gathering there at this church in 1817. 3,000 people attended. And the abolition leaders like Richard Allen, that name, I think he's on one of our postage stamps, and James Fortin, they were there. And they asked among the 3,000 black Americans gathered, how many of you, who would like to speak in support of the colonization movement? And not one person put their hand up. And then they said, how many people are against this? And there was this roar from the crowd. 3,000 people, no. And people began to stand up one by one and to say, we built this country. This is our country. We farmed this land. We fought for this land. We've given birth. And I find that so instructive and informative right now for us, right? Think about people who have suffered, violence, hunger, so much, from the Fortin family to the foot soldiers, and who said, this is my place. I'm here. I'm dedicated. I'm bound to you, right? 5-4. I think that's about what I'd give us, right? Slightly encouraging, but a reason to keep going forward. So I think about this time. I had no grand pronouncement, except for deep respect, right? For all of those people who've gone before us, who've walked beside us, who still believe that I'm going to love and serve and care, that my life is called to be a blessing, and then I'm going to resist with every single thing in my body those people who are so broken that all they can do is break, right? I'm going to stand against those people who think continuing the curse will somehow get us somewhere. So may we, in this kind of time of celebration, remember this mercy and blessing and grace that we have received, that fills our bodies, that fills our lives, that has given us one another, that has given us everything worth loving and caring. And may we each invest our own lives to carry that forward. Amen.